All right, hey guys, it's the long-awaited second part of the European realm. This is a much longer lecture than I normally would do, mostly because one, it's recorded, and if you guys need to pause to like have a think break or bathroom or water or oh my God, I can't listen to her anymore for another 20 minutes. I need to pause, walk away, and come back. Yeah, I get it, but please do actually come back and finish the lecture. Uh, it is just a little bit important, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to go back a little bit and go over some of the stuff that I kind of touched on at the end of last lecture, which is another reason why this one is a little bit longer. But I don't feel like I gave a sufficient enough explanation of things. So I would rather um, go over it again and, well, if you've heard it already, then I think you can, well, I know you can skip, but be careful with that because you don't know what you might miss. Or you can be on extra, like the speed, you can increase that. And then you can hear my voice be all funny. Not that it already isn't, but extra fun. Who knows? All right. So we are talking about the European realm, part two. So I'm sorry, that's the fun of having dual screens is if you're still on one, it acts like that one. Um, so the European Union, the unification process, this has been a complex, gradual, step-by-step process to create a single territorial economy across Europe. It's involved agreements on free trade across boundaries without tariffs, which are specialized taxes or border controls. It's had the abolition of protectionist economic policies, policies that would uh, protect, take care of one country more than another, not exactly take advantage, but take advantage. There's also, they had to harmonize all of their national laws, like the ones on taxation, in order to establish kind of a level playing field so that, again, making everything even and cool. There involved a lot of political cooperation, which I'll give you a bit of a spoiler alert if I haven't already. Having a political cooperation with all of these different regions in Europe is hard. It's very complex. Uh, I mean, it's complex enough to be like the United States to have that one central government, but at least our states, with the exception of some, haven't been warring for centuries. You know, definitely not centuries, but a couple for the U.S. But that's for a U.S. history class, which I also teach. Um, Other things that have been involved is like the introduction of a single currency, being the euro. Not everybody was all on board to be like, hey, yeah, I want to just, get rid of our currency and hop on to this one nationalized currency that, if the value of the euro goes down, so does the value of my economy. But if I'm like Britain and the value of the pound sterling stays kind of even, but the euro is going down, yeah, I want that economic stability. So there has been a little bit of tension and awkwardness over that. There's also been agreements to transfer specific powers from national governments to European Union institutions. So transfer specific powers, it's in some places it's borders and visas. It's having that single currency. It also has, making sure that taxation and other types of laws like that are all united. And I realized after I cleaned my glasses that I forgot to mention the political cooperation and a creation of a pan-European executive, judicial, and legislative bodies. That also is complex. I mean, Europe has a population of 600 million. That's twice the size of the United States and trying to make an executive, judicial, and legislative bodies with countries that speak entirely different languages and have entirely different cultural values, it makes for a sticky situation, to say the least. Here's just a better map of European unification. So all of these green areas are in the oh crap. Sorry about that. Cats will be cats. But over here on this map, we have the Schengen area. The Schengen area, it's all of these countries in green. That means that you can go from any one of these countries with a single passport or no passport, as long as you're in the European Union and you're all good. They don't have to be a European Union member to be in this area. As you can see, Switzerland and Norway and, well, Iceland are part of the area, but they aren't necessarily part of the European Union. And then there are a couple of European Union members that are just not part of that. You still need to have a specific passport in order to get into some of those areas. So go back to this map, actually. So European integration is a classical example of supranationalism, which is, let me repeat that again so it doesn't sound like supra-nationalism. It's the voluntary association in economic, political, or cultural spheres of independent states to yield some measure of their sovereignty for their mutual benefit. So, like, this area shows all the areas in the Schengen, like I just mentioned, and they also have, if you notice on some of these, pardon me, some of these areas, there's that little funky little symbol, kind of, to me. I remember it being for the euro because it looks like an E that maybe a second grader would write, because maybe it's just me, but I remember always adding extra lines to E's. Not that my name has any E's that I would do that to. But the Eurozone membership, those are the ones that have given up their own currency and use the euro. And the Schengen area is where 26 countries have abolished like internal border controls and have a single visa policy for non-EU visitors. This is ensured that Europe's map is a complex mosaic again. Although I don't think it ever stopped being a complex mosaic, it's always kind of been, but this kind of just increased the complexity. The European Union is also not just an organization on paper. It's had a profound impact on national economies, the role of individual states, and on the daily lives of its member countries' nearly 450 million citizens. Yes, that's a lot. So what are some of the consequences of this unification? Because it all sounds great on paper, but we all know if something sounds great on paper, maybe there's some issues that we haven't quite worked out. Don't worry, we figured some of those out. So one of the big things is EU directives are aimed at the creation of a single market of producers, consumers, businesses, and workers. The idea is that corporations should be able to produce and sell products anywhere within the EU without legal impediments. So, without certain taxes, without certain tariffs, and they have to still follow the environmental regulations, but it's not as though like before, where if you were a Spanish company and you wanted to do, produce things up in Poland, random example, you'd have to work out international business laws and figure out how you could do that business effectively, and all that jazz. Being in the EU kind of eliminates that. I will also say, I know this map I have, it's a wee bit out of date because it stops with entry at 2007, and there has been other nations have been added in, but it was one of the better maps that I found that had the inclusion of most of the European Union and wasn't in a different language. So on the flip side of corporations being able to do what they needed to do without legal impediments, it also was the same for workers. Workers should be able to move anywhere within the EU and find employment without legal barriers. In the US, if you are a citizen, you are free to get a job anywhere in the US. If you're an immigrant on a visa, you have like limitations on where, not limitations on where, but you have to prove that you're here legally and that you're allowed to do the work that you're applying to do. So again, this meant that member states had to harmonize a wide range of national laws, not only from taxation, but also environmental protection and even educational standards, which, okay, all right, I see this being, as long as they're good, I can see this being a good idea. I can also see some of the big problems that might arise from this. Other things, this is why the EU introduced a single central bank with considerable power over the economy, with control over shit like interest rates. And the less I say about interest rates and student loans and, attempting to get a mortgage to buy a house, the more sane I am. So I'm just going to say interest rates with a crazy smile on my face. That's also why they introduced the euro. Currently, the EU is dealing with new countries that are vying for admittance. While some of the original countries have some regions in there that are pushing back against their own state for their control and autonomy, or their region against the central power. This is kind of what Brexit was a little bit about. It was about a lot more than that, but like people don't like to feel like that their country, their government, what they're used to is no longer in control, essentially. And again, their Brexit has caused a lot of increased tension within the Europe over its departure. I'll get into that in a little bit, but yeah, Brexit kind of is it's a sticky issue. I don't know why I like that phrase, but it works. So more recent consequences of integration. There are the challenging risks of expansion. Basically, would the integration of these weaker economies undermine the strength and cooperation between existing members? Should the ties between current members be first deepened and solidified before letting in newcomers? Especially considering when all members have to, they must adhere to these strict economic policies and harmonize their political systems and laws. That's a bit difficult. What's the right answer? It's kind of hard to say, especially when you're trying to take on an apolitical role like me. But there's also been numerous structural implications that have arisen from this expansion that have affected all member countries. First of all, some of the pre-2004 union's less affluent countries that used to be on the receiving end of subsidy programs now had to pay up to support poorer new Eastern member states. Portugal, for example, is one of those. It's like a little bit bitter about that, because I'll get into that when we get to the regions, but they were on the receiving end of a subsidy that's like super help, and then they're like, wait a minute, no, that's gone, and kind of messes with life and economy there. Second, there's also been disputes that have intensified over the representation at the EU's Brussels headquarters. Everybody wants to make sure that they're like, it is a democracy. Everybody's voice is heard. Their concerns are addressed. And whether or not the representation is all equal and all of that has been kind of a arguing point. And one of the biggest points is that the incorporation of weaker national economies tends to compromise the ability of the EU to move forward in unison, because the weaker members aren't able to keep their financial deficits within limits, because they have been in a bad spot, to say the least, financially. And sometimes their industries, these poorer countries, their industries are hurt by the more developed and competitive industries of the wealthier members. It also kind of puts a drag on the wealthier members who are paying subsidies to help out these weaker economies. Really, this has kind of come to head when with the integration or the inclusion of countries like Romania and Bulgaria. They have been pretty criticized in this regard. One thing to kind of point out is some of the areas that are kind of getting the we don't know if we want to have you in there are ones that are very close to the former Soviet Union, or were former Soviet Union satellite states. So Cold War might be over, but the mentality is still, or the mentality and some of the long-lasting effects are still there. Or we'll get into that later. All right, so Brexit. Brexit is still insane to me. I didn't quite understand it when it happened. Granted, it was 2016 and other political things were going on, so that more of my focus was on the American side, but is what it is. So what the fuck happened? It was one of the, first of all, it's probably one of the most critical challenges to the EU. Came from the UK, which has often been described as the reluctant European, because they're on an island away from the mainland, so they have some disconnect, but also not as much, especially in the post-war years. There was the big drive for European unification, which again we'll talk about. So there had been a growing opposition in the UK with the continued membership in the EU. And so what the government decided to do is, all right, we'll be democratic about this and let it hold a popular referendum, which was held on June 23rd, 2016. Not the date you have to know, but knowing that, it was summer of 2016 might help out in just remembering it, and or hey, maybe you'll win a trivia contest that way. So why were people wanting to leave? So those favoring leave argued that the EU rules constrained the British economy, and that the UK was asked to contribute way too much to the spectrum of funds that were distributed among other member states. More generally, they opposed the idea of a ever closer union as a growing threat to the UK's sovereignty. And most importantly, they also claimed that the UK must control its own borders in order to reduce the number of immigrant workers and refugees. This also has a handy-dandy account of who voted to remain and who voted to leave. So what about those that were like, no, dude, we need to stay here? So those favoring remain argue that the benefits of the membership outweighed the cost. Thanks to the EU, they claimed that the United Kingdom was able to send more than half of its exports to European Union countries, which again, since we have that handy dandy tariff and taxes policies, lot fairer to more positive for sending exports there if you're still in the union. Also, London had once again become one of the more influential nodes in the global economy, which was a big boon back to British pride, because they had always had, in their nationalism that, London was this huge, big, influential city. It was a huge, dominant financial center. And then the World Wars happened and America and the Soviet Union took over. So some of their pride was, definitely like bruised. So having London again rise back up, it's like, hell yeah, that's our bro, yeah. I don't know why that popped in, but hey, roll with it. Also, the country was able to play a prominent role in EU decision-making, especially concerning the free movement of people between the European continent and the UK. So, in their view, severing ties with the European Union would not solve the refugee problem and could even worsen it by depriving the British of a voice in a realm-wide policymaking on this critical issue. Moreover, EU supporters maintained that the UK was committed to staying outside of the Eurozone, so they again would be therefore remaining unaffected by its fiscal crises. Like I was saying, some countries didn't want to join because if the value of the euro drops, but you also use your other currency, like the Brits in their pound sterling, you're not as economically screwed because you still have this currency that has more financial power and value than the lowered one. The other, and I think one of the biggest ones, is that they also argued that immigrant workers contributed significantly to the UK's economy, and they did. And I don't know as much about the UK economy currently, so I won't comment further on that. But people yelling that, we need to get all these damn immigrants out, but these immigrants are contributing significantly to your economy and doing good things. Kind of a oxymoron kind of thing, but Britain is Britain. That's what they gonna do. This was further complicated with just how close the vote was. I mean, looking over at here, the vote was pretty freaking close. I mean, the biggest points of margin was just one city, and actually, no, the two biggest points in point spreads had been about 20 points between London and Scotland, and those both were closer to Remain. Well, everything else was kind of very like, holy crap, that's very tight. That's a tight race. It hasn't helped that again, how close the vote was. There's also been a lot of disagreement between both people in the UK and the UK and the European Union in negotiating the terms of departure and future relations, as well as there's been an absolute carousel ride of different prime ministers from 2016 until now. I want to say there's been at least 5, and it's now been 8 years, but 5 in 8 years, even if I'm lowballing it, that's a lot of turnover for the public governmental position. That's crazy madness. Um, Overall, it's fair to say that the Brexit controversy has been a very much a political and politicized dispute without a clear plan that also laid out the consequences of European Union withdrawal. One of the most difficult issues involving this relates to Scotland and Northern Ireland, um, because they are part of what is the United Kingdom. I will go deeper into this in a little bit, but the United Kingdom is different from England. Uh, it is four separate countries. Four countries of the United Kingdom are Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So the issues that are really difficult relate mostly to Scotland and Northern Ireland, because while they are a part of the United Kingdom, their majorities voted to remain in the EU. Thus, for the UK, Brexit also meant confronting a lot of major internal political challenges. In the case of Scotland, where strong independence movements have been developing for decades, could lead to a potential breakup of the United Kingdom. Now, I will say, like, a lot of this I get from the textbook, and I have not, and I will admit that's on me, that I haven't done my research currently, whether or not this is still a potential issue for the UK, but I don't think it's going to go away at the very least. So that's why I still am including it and talking about this. For Northern Ireland, should it stay with the UK after EU exit, a hard border would be created between the Republic of Ireland, an independent country that remains in the EU, and Northern Ireland. There's been considerable apprehension and criticism of this possibility that exists on both sides of the border. So it's not inconceivable that Brexit could have resulted in the reunification of Ireland, but since it hasn't happened, I don't think it will, but there's always a chance. I have been wrong before. Just don't tell anyone else. All right, so what about the remaining outsiders of the EU? There are a number of other countries and territories that still remain outside the EU. The first big group includes 5 of the 7 states that emerged out of former Yugoslavia, Albania. Here in the Western Balkan Peninsula, most are troubled politically as well as economically. We'll get into that and we'll do our best. So only Slovenia and Croatia have achieved full European Union. So these 2 have been admitted into the EU. So the rest of this, Serbia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. No, well, they should say North Macedonia, but they hadn't changed it yet. And we'll get into that in a minute. Also, Montenegro and Kosovo, who are now more independent countries over Serbia. They rank among Europe's poorest and most ethnically fractured states, yet they do contain almost 20 million people whose circumstances could worsen remaining outside of the EU club. Better EU leaders reasoned to move them towards membership by demanding political, social, and economic. And in some cases, this has worked, as I will get into when I get to the regions of Europe. The second group of outsiders is comprised of Ukraine and its neighbors. The government of Ukraine itself had expressed interest, but its electorate is strongly and regionally divided. There's also the whole civil conflict that's kind of put a lot of things on hold. kind of vague gesturally, that's not a word, vaguely gestures towards Russia. It also would be kind of a very bold move to have some of um, uh, the former Eastern Bloc states to join the European Union when they're right next to Russia, such as Moldova, which views the EU as a potential supporter in the struggle against, the de-evolution along its eastern border, and also one that's not often in the European map. We'll actually talk about it more in the Russian realm. Is the country of Georgia. It's across the Black Sea from the Ukraine. It is proclaimed its interest in future membership for a similar reason, and that's to find an ally against Russian intervention in its internal affairs, which is totally fair. Finally, there's been another long-mentioned candidate for EU membership, and that is Turkey. Some EU leaders have wanted to include a fellow NATO member, Turkey, for geostrategic reasons. It's basically the border of Russia and Central Asia and several other countries. So in Southwest Asia. So it hits all these areas that are very politically important, and strategically it would be good to have Turkey right there to have that influence. Well, others have argued that Turkey is just not European enough to join. I'll let you guess what the fuck that means, because yeah. But the Turkish case for accession has been thrown into a different light today because of the country's pivotal role in the refugee crisis that has engulfed Europe. And don't you worry, we'll talk about it. So, European geopolitics. So, NATO expansion. NATO is the North American Treaty Organization. It was a organization built after World War II, so kind of have a security safety block from Russia. So it's there to basically play the militarily tough guy. So with NATO expansion, the emphasis on EU developments is kind of overshadowed this very important pan-European institution. NATO is a very different organization than the European Union. First off, it is primarily concerned with politics and security. No fucks about economics. Then NATO's purpose is to provide military protection for its members. Secondly, NATO is led by the United States. So for some European countries, that's like why are we letting those guys over the, across the sea have power here? But the US does provide the bulk of the alliance's military muscle. And also, Canada is included. I just kind of like that. And also Canada was there. Yay. I shouldn't joke. I mean, I watch hockey. I know how violent Canadians can be. So third, one of the things, the NATO contains Turkey. Turkey is a part of NATO, and that country that is hugely important because of its strategic location. Again, it's at the southern edge of Europe, nearest to the Middle East. So NATO, again, it was created in 1949 to provide a security umbrella for Western Europe under U.S. leadership. I mean, in response, the Soviets and their satellites created the Warsaw Pact, which was not as powerful as NATO, but it is what it is. So when the Cold War ended in 1991 with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, NATO kind of became more of a general security organization that provides stability across Europe rather than one that was just there to kind of ward off Soviet Union expansion. Also, now it has become more concerned with emerging 21st century threats to its member states, terrorism, attacks by rogue states with weapons of mass destruction, and cyber warfare, which is a very real and growing danger within with a very real and growing danger with critical global implications. So I found this handy dandy map, and it is a little out of date. As I circled up here, it is from October of 2018. So things may have changed a bit here and there. But it kind of shows you what nations are in the EU, NATO, the Schengen area, and in the Eurozone, and then which ones they're not in, but are in with some. It's not the most important because it's not going to show up on a quiz like which country is part of the EU and the Schengen area, but is not part of NATO or the European zone or the Eurozone. It's a wee bit more nitpicky and specific, but it is also a kind of a good idea if you're curious to, okay, here's where this country stands. So here's some fun shit. And by fun shit, this is a little less fun. So geopolitics in the Baltics. First off, what are the Baltics? The Baltics are this area that are countries that are really bordering the Baltic Sea, especially this area here of somewhat of Poland, but not as much, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Also parts of Finland and Sweden and Russia do play a game in there, but mostly we're looking at this general area. So in recent years, this area here has become something of a testing ground for European-Russian relations. There are 4 huge issues in play, and they are all interconnected. First off, so the countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they are who were former Soviet republics. They used to be under the Soviet Union's control. They're now in NATO, and they are sitting right at Russia's doorstep, as you can see on the map right there. And they have always been kind of considered critical to Russian security interests, which is why the Soviet Union annexed them in past times until it had to let them go when the USSR imploded. They have this biggest advantage is how they have access to the Baltic Sea, which will get you out there into the North Sea to the Atlantic Sea. So this is a huge port area to get goods shipped. Moreover, there also are a sizable ethnic Russian minorities in these countries, which adds to Moscow's interest in this area. When we talk about the Russian realm, we'll get into more of how these ethnic Russian minorities became very important and why there are so many. Like for instance, in Estonia, there's 28% are Russian ethnic minorities. 28% of that of Estonia's population is. Second big issue is over land, the Baltic states that are only connected to another NATO country at what's called the Suwałki Gap, which is right here. I handy-dandy kind of circled the area, but it is a 40-mile stretch of border between Lithuania and Poland. That's supposed to be a 2, but it's kind of hard to draw with a mouse. But that's a 2 to let you know that it's 4.2. It is a vulnerable land connection because it can be easily blocked by Russian intervention from Kaliningrad, which is this little tiny bit of Russia right there. It is a highly militarized Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea, and it also is under threat from Belarus, which is a close Russian ally. So if the Baltic states would be cut off from their allies, there would be a significant military. So if the Baltic states would be cut off from their allies, shit would go down. There's already a significant militarization of the Suwalki Gap on both the Russian and the Polish sides. Third, it really doesn't help the insecurity in the Baltic states that 2 of the countries across the Baltic Sea, which are Finland and Sweden here, are not members of NATO. And they've allowed Russian naval forces to basically dominate this body of water with major naval bases here in Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. Although I will say, I did that. So Kaliningrad near St. Petersburg. I will say though, Sweden, while it's officially neutral, it's been increasingly concerned about threats from Russia. In fact, even in 2018, the Swedish government embarked on a major preparedness campaign in case of war, which included constructing a series of underground bunkers. So shit's going bad when they're like, you know what? We need underground bunkers. That's what's going to save us. Thank you, and pardon me. So the other big issue is Russia's constructing a new gas pipeline. They're calling it Nord Stream 2, and it's from the Russian city of Vyborg along the bottom of the Baltic Sea to northern Germany. It is a mega project. It's entirely financed by the Russians, and it's to supply gas to Germany. But there are already gas pipelines from Russia to Germany and parts of Western Europe. So why the hell do they need this second pipeline? Answer: the existing pipelines currently go through Poland and Ukraine, both countries with conflict-ridden relationships with Russia. Both countries depend on a large part on gas from Russia, and there have been times when Russia has threatened the supply of gas as political leverage. But cutting off gas to either Poland or Ukraine inevitably meant depriving other customers further west, which would jeopardize Russian business interests. And God forbid we do that. So the Nord Stream 2 will solve this problem for Russia, as it will be in a position to still threaten to cut off Poland or Ukraine while still being able to supply Germany and other Western countries. Polish people not very happy with this development, and they're watching the construction with obvious concern and a little bit of a betrayal from Germany, which agreed to have this new pipeline. But for Russia, the new pipeline will be one more reason to maintain control over the Baltic Sea. We'll talk more about Russia and the Baltic Sea when we get into the Russian realm. Altogether, this part of Europe is seeing increased military buildup and tension with increased Russian assertiveness. The 3 Baltic states are trying for a posture that does enough to deter Russia, but not too much to provoke it. And they have to trust a continued NATO and the United States security commitment. Poland allowing for NATO to organize a growing military presence around its northern borders. Sweden is increasing its military capabilities and seeking out closer relations with NATO. And Germany, as the most central and economically powerful country, is trying to maintain a geopolitical stability in the middle of it all. Now, I won't say that that's all gone to hell, but it's definitely become a lot more complicated. Yay! So Europe's refugee crisis. Sorry about that. Another challenge that's faced Europe in current years is, and that is sometimes framed in terms of a security threat, is the refugee crisis. This is due to the turmoil and conflict that have plagued parts of Northern Africa and Southwest Asia since 2011, and have triggered an ever larger stream of refugees into, well, relatively nearby Europe. When we talk about the North African, Southwest Asian realm, we'll mention that again. And while it might appear pretty darn close for some countries, it's still quite the arduous journey. So there are huge contrasts between the North African, Southwest Asian realm and the European realm. Like they're enormous. One is quite rich, politically stable, highly integrated, democratic, progressive, and largely Christian. That's Europe. The other is mostly poor, conflict-ridden, often war-torn, fragmented, authoritarian, conservative, and mostly Islamic. That's North Africa / Southwest Asia. The story of this refugee crisis is just as much about globalization and the shrinking of distance as it is about the stark socioeconomic juxtapositions and cultural encounters. So the statistics here are really astounding. Like, good God. The total verified number of illegal border crossings into Europe rose from about 400,000 in 2014 to more than 2 million in 2015. It's a lot. So this huge sudden increase also coincided with a huge major shift of refugee flows from the central Mediterranean to the eastern. So central Mediterranean would have been more here. And then the eastern Mediterranean is more down here, as well as the Balkans. Those coming across the Mediterranean mostly originated in northern Africa, and to a lesser extent sub-Saharan Africa. So those that are really trying to hit Spain, Italy, sometimes France, but not really. Mostly Italy. In contrast, those that were seeking entry into Europe through the Balkans came up through Syria and other sources in Southwest Asia, which this map has cut off. So it's a little bit right there, but a little further off. The EU countries that are on the front line are Greece and Italy. From there, refugees or migrants, and this has actually become an interesting sociolingual phenomenon. The distinction between a refugee and a migrant has become a politically contentious distinction in Europe. Refugees are there because they need to escape war-torn, violent conflicts, where migrants are just seeking a better economical life. That has become a very politicized distinction, but I will leave my opinions on that alone. So from Greece and Italy, refugees or migrants typically try to travel to EU countries that will provide them the best chance of acceptance and a good living. In this practice, this means many are destined for Germany and Sweden. And as you can kind of see on this map, that Germany and Sweden do have a large amount of uh, distribution of refugees. So once they've reached their destination, they can apply for asylum. Those that are escaping political, like they're leaving a war-torn area for their own lives because XYZ factor. They can apply for asylum or a legally protected residency status. Once people have also stepped foot inside EU borders, for instance, in Italy or Greece, they can move around any of the 26 countries that are part of the Schengen area. It's been proposed, especially by Germany, that all EU member states should accept their share of asylum seekers, but most countries have been a little less than forthcoming. Shocking, I know. Some, particularly those on the Balkan route, which it's kind of frustrating that there's the Baltics and the Balkans, because it wouldn't be fun if it didn't confuse you. But some of those on the Balkan route have seized initiative, and they've put up fences in order to be overwhelmed by refugees. This is including countries like Hungary, Austria, and North Macedonia. North Macedonia. Other EU countries have refused to take in any refugees at all, or even a million, or just only minimal numbers. So that's going to be like Poland or Slovenia. You can see how tiny Slovenia's part of refugees is get tiny. As might be expected, most refugees would prefer to settle in Germany or Sweden than in, say, Romania or Lithuania, because they're countries that are not doing as well economically, but Sweden and Germany are stable. And the problem of distributing refugees has become both intractable and which is just incredibly difficult and politically divisive. I can read, I swear. It's incredibly conflict heavy and politically divisive in the EU. At the meantime, while this was all going on in 2015, Italy and especially Greece became swamped with refugees at the same time that they were experiencing difficult economic times. When North Macedonia closed its border, thousands of makeshift refugee camps sprang up across northern Greece. It was this increasingly untenable situation in Greece that actually drove the EU to an agreement with Turkey, where more than half of the illegal border crossers into Europe in 2015, amounting to about 1.2 million people, came via Turkey. So from Turkey, they either, Turkey, I believe, is right there. They either cross the Aegean Sea to enter Greece, or would enter Greece via Bulgaria over land routes. The deal implied that Turkey would close and control its land borders with Greece and Bulgaria, and that it would stop Aegean Sea crossings, and that it would accept returned refugees from Greece. In exchange, the EU pledged the EU pledged $3.2 billion in financial support to Turkey in order to run its expanded refugee centers and visa-free travel for Turks to the European Union. And they also promised to accelerate Turkey's bid for EU membership. The agreement did have the intended effect of reducing the influx of immigrants into the EU. So illegal border crossings into Europe dropped from 1.2 million in 2015 to just over 100,000 in 2018, which that's a significant reduction. The refugee problem and its possible solutions have had a divisive effect on both the EU and individual countries. As noted previously, it surrounded the UK's 2016 Brexit referendum and has fueled support for populist right-wing political parties from France to Denmark, from the Netherlands to Poland. Yay. The difficulty in distinguishing between migrants, who are those who seek a better economic future, versus refugees who want to escape deadly conflict at home, has also complicated matters, as has the fact that there are certain aging European countries would clearly benefit from an influx of young immigrants. In fact, of all the asylum seekers in the European Union in 2015, 83% were under the age of 35. So for an aging, dying nation, having an influx of young immigrants that are able to do work and repopulate would be fantastic. But there are issues to that. And we'll get to that. There's also the challenge of rising Islamic terrorism in Europe over the past decade. It is generally not directed. Stop, let me rephrase that and take a sip of water. Sorry, I forgot to switch slides. My bad. So the challenge of rising Islamic terrorism in Europe over the past decade, it's generally not directly connected to the refugee crisis. In fact, most terrorism suspects are born in the EU or have entered the EU legally. But because a myriad of asylum seekers are Muslims, for many Europeans, the politics of these issues have become intertwined. It's that ethnocentric thinking, kind of. So, the specter of Islamic terror in Europe. And there has been a lot. Since the beginning of this century, Europe has experienced a series of terrorist attacks that were claimed by Islamic militant organizations, mostly ISIS. And this goes in reverse chronological order. May 2017, 222 people were killed and hundreds wounded in the arena bombing in Manchester in the UK. In March 2016, 32 people were killed and hundreds wounded at bombings in Brussels. 2015, 130 people died and hundreds were wounded in a series of attacks in Paris. 2015, 12 people were killed in the Paris office of the satirical newspaper. And I forgot to get the pronunciation, but Charlie Hebdo. Yeah, is not right, but close enough. It's in retaliation for its articles on Islamic fundamentalism. In March 2012, 6 people, including Jewish school children, were killed in Toulouse, France. July 2005, 52 London commuters died when suicide bombers blew themselves up on subway trains and a bus. March 2004. Can you tell I'm still in the 20 past that? It throws me off. March 2004, a series of bombs on commuter trains killed 191 people and injured nearly 2,000 in metropolitan Madrid, this is some fucked up shit. It's not good. I would argue most Muslims would be also like, that's not right. It's the work of extremists. Again, most of these attacks were said to be the work of ISIS, which stands for Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. We'll talk about that eventually. The fundamentalist terrorist organization that controls those countries and Libya. So Islamic terrorism has in Europe has been on the rise for the past few decades, and the reasons aren't always clear. On one hand, they're really grounded in the involvement of the EU and individual European countries like France into the conflicts in the Middle East. France, the UK, they all helped out in the Second Gulf War and the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that fun jazz that's been going on for what 20 something years now. God, I'm old. But on the other hand, there are also numerous European cities that are home to a relatively large number of disaffected, radicalized, second generation Islamic youth who were born in Europe, but still didn't seem to fit in. So although the attackers were linked to the Islamic State, it is hard to determine the extent to which their actions were centrally coordinated or locally initiated. These events have helped fuel right-wing anti-immigration and anti-Muslim sentiments, even if the overwhelming majority of European Muslims are as critical or as fearful of Islamic terror as everyone else. The challenge for European governments is to fight terrorism without alienating this Muslim majority and to prevent the radicalization of young Muslims by building a more inclusive society. That's right. They need to get woke. That was a joke, kind of silly one. You should be used to that from me by now. All right. Yeah. All right. So now the fun stuff. Regions of Europe. So in the past, Europe divided rather easily into Western, Northern, or Nordic, Western Europe, Northern Europe, Mediterranean, Southern Europe, and Eastern regions. And countries were just grouped accordingly. The traditional configuration remains relevant today, but in the era of European unification, a core periphery framework has been superimposed on that regional scheme. That makes it more now defined in terms of how central or peripheral countries are to the workings of the EU. So in other words, Europe can still be understood as a formal, more or less homogenous cultural regions, yet simultaneously the entire realm increasingly functions as a tightly independent economic and political regional system and a spatial network that revolves around the EU. So right here, you can see this on this map. That is kind of looking at the core boundaries. So you can see that while these areas are still definitely part of the EU, the big core area still lies mostly in the West, and that's just kind of because of the way the EU was formed. So there are 4 major regions that constitute the European realm that we are going to talk about. There is Eastern Europe that include, scratch that, I do apologize. There is Western Europe, which includes Britain, Ireland. There's Northern Europe, Mediterranean Europe that includes Slovenia and Croatia. There's Eastern Europe that includes the Balkans, East Central Europe, the Baltic states, and the Eastern periphery. So Eastern Europe is going to be the most complicated one because of course it is. The European core is primarily defined based on regional economic performances, not political territorialization. So for instance, Northern Italy and like Southern Sweden are both parts of this core, but not necessarily Southern Italy or Northern Sweden. That's a lot due to economic reasons and fun shit like that. There's also the inclusion of Estonia in the core, despite its relatively remote location. But this this regionalization underscores how complicated and challenging it can be to understand the complexity of spatial organization. Like, this shit gets funky, guys. We'll get through it. So, regions of Europe, let's talk about Western Europe. Western Europe consists of 11 countries, including the microstate of Liechtenstein, which is fun to say. This region lies almost entirely within the European core that forms the heart of the EU. The large offshore islands of Britain and Ireland, previously in the past, they've been known as the British Isles, but if you say that to somebody from the Republic of Ireland, they may have words, and you don't want those words. So just remember to keep Ireland separate. But they have all been closely involved in Western Europe's history and its ongoing political development. So the countries that are in here include Germany, France. Let me check that for distribution because I know they wrote it down. The Benelux, which actually it's kind of a neat area. It is 3 small countries. It's the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So they basically took the first syllables, or the first letters of their name and made a new country. I wish I could do that. That'd be cool. Other countries, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic. It is also referred to as Czechia. As far as research has done, has found, both are kind of acceptable. Some of it's just a shorthanded form of Czech Republic. I know it's used a lot in sports now, so that it's, I guess, easier to say, and I'm not entirely positive of why they changed the name. I just know that it is there. There's also the United Kingdom, which does consist of 4 different countries, and the Republic of Ireland. So, Germany. Oh, Germany. So twice during the 20th century, Germany plunged Europe and the world into war. At the end of World War II in 1945, the defeated and devastated German state was divided into 2 parts, West Germany and East Germany. East Germany was also forced to surrender some territory to Poland. West Germany and East Germany then set forth on widely different economic and political trajectories. First off, quick little side note, history lesson. East Germany was, after World War II, or West Germany and East Germany were split between like the 4 big allied powers of the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. Soviet Union took over East Germany, whereas the other 3 kind of split parts of West Germany, mostly having a US influence. But this split also went as far as it took the capital city of unified Germany, of Berlin, and that also got split down the middle. So West Berlin, even though it's smack dab in the center of East Germany, was a westernized state, and it got all of the benefits of aid that went to Western Europe and countries that aren't the Soviet Union. So the Soviet governance of East Germany was established on the USSR's communist model, and they also got their pound of flesh. There was a lot of repayment for the extreme hardships that the Soviet Union had suffered at German hands during the war. And this rule was just unwaveringly punitive. It was not good, especially right after the war. Several bad atrocities, not fun, bad things. Do not approve. However, the US-led authority in West Germany was far less strict, and it was more aimed at rehabilitation than retribution. West Germany was included when the Marshall Plan was instituted in 1948, and the massive infusion of AIDS, the massive infusion of AIDS stimulated rapid economic recovery. At the same time, West Germany was reorganized politically into a modern federal state based on democratic foundations, and thus West Germany's economy began to thrive. Geography also worked really well in West Germany's favor. It had common borders with all but one of the original member states of the EU. And it swiftly rebuilt its transportation infrastructure that was second to none in Europe. Like, if you want a transportation infrastructure, German's the way to go. West Germany now exported huge quantities of iron, steel, motor vehicles, machinery, textiles, and farm products. Until just a few years ago, actually, Germany had the largest export economy by value in the world, although it has definitely been passed by China and the United States. However, Germany's exports per capita are still by far the highest on Earth. So you can always find random statistics to make something look real shiny and good, and that's what West Germany did. At the time of Germany's reunification in 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, West Germany had a population of about 62 million, while East Germany had 17 million. All right, sorry, I thought I had put more on a slide about East Germany, but I didn't, so you'll just have to listen to me babble on. By 2015, the former East Germany's population was down to less than 13 million, and its shrinkage is expected to continue in the coming years. Mostly, this is due to decades of communist misrule in the East. It's yielded outdated factories, crumbling infrastructures, polluted environments, drab cities. Like, if you've ever seen Soviet architecture, it's just downright depressing. Google it. It also has inefficient farming and inadequate legal and other institutions. So really, the 1990 reunification was more of a rescue than a merger, and the cost to the reconstituted German state has since then been gargantuan. Another challenge facing Germany, along with other Western European countries, sorry, is the integration of a sizable immigrant minorities. Germany now has 16 million immigrants, about 20% of its total population of 83.5 million. But they are not only culturally different, but worse off economically. The immigrants, I mean. More than a third of immigrant households live below the poverty line, largely because of the unemployment rate of immigrants far exceeds that of native Germans. I will again leave that answer of why, leave that question of why up to y'all. But nevertheless, Germany navigated the recent global recession better than any other European country, and it's kind of retained its power as the realm's economic powerhouse. Today, the country is developing closer ties with Eastern Europe, and from the Balkans to the Baltic Sea, Germany is regarded as the region's most desirable trading partner. It has also played a leading role in the EU bailouts of Greece and other countries. And in a very ironic historical twist, given the initial reasons for European integration, it has been a vital force in maintaining a sufficient degree of EU unity. I can speak good. All right, France. So first, we're going to kind of compare France to Germany. Territorially, France is larger than Germany. And this map, like on this map right here, it looks like it has a superior relative locations. It has coastlines here on the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and at Calais up here, that begins the North Sea. But France has no good natural harbors, and ocean-going ships cannot navigate its rivers and other waterways very far inland. So while it has all of this, it can't really use it. There's also a significant contrast between France and Germany regarding their urban systems, meaning like the spatial distribution and interrelationships among cities of various sizes. So France has one dominant city, and that's Paris. No other city comes close in either size or centrality. Paris, which right there, it has 11 million residents, whereas its closest big city rival of Lyon down here has 1.7 million. That's a big ass difference. Germany, on the other hand, doesn't have one big dominant city, but it has a wider range of medium-sized cities that are like in the 100,000 plus category. Germany has 80, whereas France has like 40. It's less than 40. So Germany kind of doubles the medium-sized cities, and in lieu of having one big city. So France and Paris. Paris is very, very important. It is an example of a primate city. I'm sorry, I always think of primates like apes and things like that, rather than, a primary city. See where the confusion kind of comes from. So the primate city, it's a one city that is just disproportionately large compared to all others in the national urban system. It's exceptionally expressive of a country's culture and is almost always the capital. And Paris is like one of the greatest examples of this. Geographically, Paris actually has grown so large and dominant within the French urban systems for reasons of geography and history. So geographically, Paris has had advantage in both in terms of both site, which is the physical attributes of the place it occupies, and it also has situation, which is its location relative to surrounding areas. The site of the original settlement at Paris lay in an island, like little island right there, and on the Seine River, a defensible spot where the river was often crossed. This island, the La City, was a Roman outpost 2,000 years ago. And for centuries, its security ensured continuity. Eventually, the island became overcrowded, and the city expanded along the banks of the river. Paris's advantageous situation lay in its fertile agricultural hinterland and the presence of key waterways. Seine River is joined near Paris by several navigable tributaries. They have tributaries including the Oise, the Marne, and the Yenne. And they are spelled just like you would not imagine, because French is French like that. So when canals expanded these waterways even farther, Paris was then linked to the Loire Valley of central France, the Rhone-Saône basin of the southeast, Lorraine, a key industrial area in the northeast, and the northern border zone with Belgium. When Napoleon reorganized France and built a radical system of roads that were later duplicated by railroads, they all focused on Paris from all parts of the country. So making the city's primacy was ensured. Historically, early on, France developed the strong tradition of having a highly centralized state in which the central government in Paris maintained tight control over 96 sub-départements. It remained so for nearly 2 centuries, but France decentralized its administrative structure in 1982 by introducing a new layer of governance, which consisted of 26 larger regional, 22 and in France itself, and 4 overseas. These regions were inserted at the level. They were inserted at the level between Paris and the départements, both to accommodate de-evolutionary forces and to seize the opportunities for regional and local growth throughout the country. In 2016, the number of regions inside of France itself was further consolidated from 22 to 13. And of course, France has to have the special names in French so that world geography professors have to go and look up how to speak French and hopefully do it right. So France has long had one of the most diversified economies in the world. Northern French agriculture, Listexia is fun. Agriculture, so northern France up here. Agriculture is intensive and varied. It exploits the country's wide range of soils and microclimates, and enjoying state subsidies and protections. In the southeast, Lyon, which, let's go back. That's where Lyon is. Lyon, which is France's second city, and it's the headquarters of the regional named the Rhone-Alpes, which I have highlighted here. That's the Rhone-Alpes. It has become a focus for growth industries and multinational firms. So money. This region of the Rhone-Alpes is evolving into a standalone economic powerhouse that is becoming a driving force in the European economy. Indeed, it is becoming one of the 4 motors of Europe, the others of which are Baden-Württemberg, which is in Germany, Catalonia, which is in Spain, and Lombardy, which is in Italy. But this area, with its own global business connections, has business connections to countries as far away as China and Chile. More broadly, I should say, France's economic geography is marked by new high-tech industries and is a leading producer of high-speed trains, aircraft, fiber optic communication systems, and space-related technology. So if you remember all the way back when I was talking about one of the Caribbean North cities that had a space launching area for Europe. There's the connection. France is also the world leader in nuclear power, which currently supplies about 70% of its electricity and thereby reduces dependence on foreign oil imports. But there is still rising opposition today that all but prohibited all but prohibits the construction of new generating facilities, which, especially given the national goal of reducing nuclear reliance to 50% by 2015, or sorry, 2025. I'm not entirely positive why there were reasons why they're moving in this direction. I'm sure there are safety concerns and other things, but I am not a scientist, not that right kind of scientist. The only type of scientist I am is a social scientist, and even that can be iffy. Sorry. France is another European state that has an rapidly aging population, totaling over 65 million, which poses some major challenges for the years ahead. If you remember, I believe it was last year or within the last 2 years, there were great protests in France for them trying to raise the retirement age to, I believe, like 65 or 70, and that just outraged much of France because no, they've worked that long in their life. They deserve to have their retirement. But so their aging population does pose major challenges. Natural population growth is close to zero and must be compensated through immigration. However, most immigrants do hail from poor Islamic countries, and they have a very different culture. And their integration and acceptance into French society has been a painful process, kind of on both ends. The French being welcoming and accepting of the differences in these immigrants' culture, and immigrants, not while maintaining their own culture, also adapting to their new homeland's culture. Not saying that you have to get rid of one to become the other, but there are some things that adaptation. The graying of the French population means that in the future, more and more elderly people will be cared for with the income earned by a shrinking productive workforce. This is not good. It made. France is also a politically divided country, in part because of growing economic inequalities, and in part because of a polarized public opinion regarding immigrants and the Muslim minority. Let me repeat that. The right-wing Front National has been a fast-growing French political party espousing an extremist and ultra-nationalist agenda that is highly critical of Muslim and other immigration, as well as EU policies in general. We'll see how that develops. So, Benelux. These three small countries are crowded into the northwest corner of the mainland Western Europe: Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Just in case you didn't see the small bit of Luxembourg, I like to draw arrows sometimes. They're collectively known by their first syllables, as I mentioned earlier. Their total population of 29 million reminds us that this is one of the most densely populated corners of our planet. I mean, thinking about these three relatively small countries, granted, it's kind of hard to see scale on a map this zoomed in, but that's a lot of people in one small area. Not coincidentally, the Low Countries, as they are sometimes called, are situated at the estuary, this means the mouth of the Great Rhine and the Scheldt rivers, and have access to seas that throughout modern history have been the envy of the Germans and the French, because they can get better access to the North Sea. I mean, the Netherlands, they are the Dutch. They used to be known for shipbuilding and all sorts of shipping fun things. So also, these three countries are a highly productive trio. Both the Netherlands and Germany, where the fuck did I get Germany? Both the Netherlands and Belgium generally rank among the top 20 economies on Earth. And Luxembourg has one of the world's highest capita gross per national income. Let me rephrase that because I mixed up words. And Luxembourg has one of the world's highest per capita gross national incomes. So the Netherlands is one of Europe's oldest democracies and a constitutional monarchy today, and has for centuries been expanding its territory. However, not by warring with its neighbors, but by wresting land from the sea. About a quarter of the country lies below sea level, which personally, if I were the Netherlands and this whole thing of climate change, I would be more than just a little afraid. But I'm not entirely sure what their preparedness for that is. Anyhow, quarter of the country lives below sea level. The urban demographic and economic center of gravity lies within a what's called a conurbation, which is a large urban complex that is formed by cooperation of two or more cities. Or really not cooperation, the merger of two cities, or more, in the country, and this happens in the country's west. It is the so-called Randstad, or ring city, is a roughly diamond shape, and it starts, here at Amsterdam, the constitutional capital, and there's Rotterdam down here. It's at the mouth of the Rhine River. There's then Europe's largest port, The Hague. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port. The Hague is the national seat of government. And Utrecht is there too. Actually, no, I was meant to move on. Belgium also has a thriving economy as well as a leading port in the city of Antwerp, which is also just really fun to say. It has a population of 100, Jesus Christ, Katie, a population with 11.5 million people. Its regional geography is actually dominated kind of by a cultural fault line that cuts diagonally across the country, separating a Flemish-speaking majority, which is of 60%, that's centered in Flanders in the northwest, from a so up here in Flanders, this is more this is where they speak Flemish, and down here in Wallonia is more of a French-speaking minority. It is about 40% of the population. Brussels, as you may note, is right in the middle of Flanders. It is still a predominantly French-speaking capital, and it forms a linguistic island in this Flemish-speaking sector. Still, the city is also one of Belgium's greatest assets because it serves as the headquarters and in many ways as the de facto capital of the European Union. Although it is very important to note that the European Union does not have an official capital city. Nevertheless, the evolution is a persistent problem for Belgium, with political parties that agitate for Flemish separation constantly roiling up and getting the social landscape kind of riled up. So Luxembourg, also a fun one to say, but still not as fun as Antwerp. But it is one of the realm's numerous mini-states. It lies between Germany, Belgium, and France, and it has a Grand Duke as the head of state. So its official name is the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, but most people just call it Luxembourg. It is a territory of only 100 square miles, and has a population of just over 600,000 people, which is to kind of put that in American terms, it's about the population of the state of Vermont. So throwing that out there as kind of a relative understanding words. Luxembourg has translated sovereignty, relative location, and stability into a haven for financial services and information technology industries. There are more than 150 banks in this tiny little country and about 14,000 holding companies, which are corporations that hold controlling stock in businesses in Europe and worldwide. With its unmatched GDP per capita, which was more than 104,000 US dollars in 2017. Luxembourg is in some ways one of the greatest beneficiaries of the advent of the European Union. And no country in Europe is stronger as in support for the European Union stronger than it is in here. So the Alpine states, that includes Switzerland, Austria, and the microstates of Liechtenstein, which is also a fun one to say. Why are all these microstates so fun to say? So these three countries on their border share an absence of coast. So no coastline, and they also share the mountainous terrain of the Alps, and really not much else after that. For instance, Austria speaks one language, Austrian, and a little bit of German. That'll work. The Swiss speak several languages. They have German in the north, French in the west, Italian in the southeast, and even a little bit of Rehato Romash in the remote Central Highlands. But that was just fun for me to say. That's not super important. Austria has a primate city, while multicultural Switzerland does not. Austria also has a substantial range of domestic raw materials. Switzerland, surprisingly, does not. Austria is twice the size of Switzerland and has a larger population, but far more trade moves across the Swiss Alps between the Western and Mediterranean Europe than that crosses over Austria. So Switzerland is, in most ways, the leading state in the Alpine region. It has a mountainous terrain and a landlocked location, which can constitute crucial barriers to economic development. However, as is so often the case, geography poses constraints in one ways while offering opportunities in the other. This is why Switzerland is such an important lesson in the complexities of human geography. Through skillful maximization of their opportunities, including the transfer needs of their neighbors, the Swiss have transformed their seemingly restrictive environment into a prosperous state. They deftly utilized the waters cascading from their mountains to generate hydroelectric power needed to develop highly specialized industries. Swiss farmers have perfected methods to optimize the productivity of mountain pastures and valley soils. Swiss leaders have converted their country's isolation into stability, security, and neutrality, which is a big deal of the neutrality. It's made itself a world banking behemoth, a global magnet for money. In Zurich, that is the German-speaking sector. That's the financial center, and Geneva down here is in the French-speaking sector, but it's one of the world's most internationalized cities. The Swiss feel they don't need to join the EU, and they have no real plans to do so in the foreseeable future. Austria, on the other hand, joined the EU in 1995 and is a remnant of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, and has a historical geography that is more reminiscent of unstable Eastern Europe than that of Switzerland. Also, fun fact, these are signs that they have in like gift shops in Austria, because people will mistake Austria for Australia. So just remember, there are no kangaroos in Austria. Kangaroos belong in Australia. So, like I said, it's far more reminiscent of an Eastern Europe, unstable Eastern Europe than that of Switzerland. In fact, even Austria's physical geography seems to demand that the country look eastward. It is at its widest, lowest, and most productive in the east, where the Danube River, which is not as easily pointed out on this map, but it's in others, links it to Hungary. Right there is Hungary, which was its old ally in the anti-Muslim wars of the past. Vienna, its capital, up here, is by far the Alpine subregion's largest city. It also lies on the country's eastern perimeter, one of the world's most expressive primate cities, with magnificent architecture, monumental art. Argument could be made for like not birthplace, but like center of classical music and opera. I mean, yeah, Mozart's from the area, that kind of thing. Today, Vienna is Western Europe's easternmost major city. Its relative location has changed dramatically with EU enlargement since 2000. Even though Vienna found itself in a more centralized position when the EU borders shifted eastward, most Austrians doubted that their neighbors to the east could ever become EU members of potentially equal standing. And one result of that is that the Austrian public support for the European Union has kind of fallen to a record low. And I can't blame them. So the Czech Republic, or Czechia, as I have said, first I'd like to mention that it is also the homeland of NHL and Boston Bruins legends Jaromír Jágr, David Pastrnak, and David Krejci, among many others. Gotta get my Bruin shit in. All right. But Czechia is focused on the historic Bohemian Basin. It's a mountain-encircled national core area, centered on the capital, Prague. It's another classic primate city. Its cultural landscape is highly reflective of Czech traditions. Prague is also an important industrial hub and collection center. It's surrounded by mountains that contain many valleys with small towns that specialize, Swiss style, in fabricating high-quality manufactures. In old Eastern Europe, even during the communist period, the Czechs were always leaders in technology and engineering, and their products can be found in foreign markets near and far. Moreover, Bohemia, which is this kind of area's old name, was always cosmopolitan and Western in its exposure, outlook, and development, with its exposure, outlook, development, and linkages. Prague lies in the upper basin of the Elbe River. Its traditional outlet through northern Germany to the North Sea. Not long ago, the Czech Republic would have been considered part of Central Europe, but today it has shifted its gaze entirely to the west, with its solid economic development fully warranting inclusion in the European core. So the United Kingdom. Oh, this is going to be fun. So it's often been observed the geographical position of the UK, just off the European mainland, reflects its traditional hesitation to consider itself part of Europe, because, they're on an island. They're not always there. I could make different historical arguments, but this is going to go on long enough. So let's power through. It did join the EU in 1973, but was always reluctant to move towards tighter integration. When most member states in 2002 adopted the new euro in favor of their currencies, the British again kept their pound sterling. Also, opposition to continued EU membership boiled to a head over the whole Brexit thing. It is a sub-region of many names, or at least two of them that are in there. So calling this whole area, like the whole United Kingdom, England, is wrong. It's just not right. It's factually incorrect. England is its own separate country, and that's this right here, this yellow bit, that is England. Britain is closer, as it includes England, Wales, and Scotland, all of this connected island. So that you can call Great Britain, but it does not include Northern Ireland. So depending on what area you're referring to, it's either England, Great Britain, or the United Kingdom. Again, the whole Brexit thing. Fun fact, with the area of about the size of the state of Oregon and a population of 67.5 million, the UK, by European standards, is a fairly large country. Based on a combination of physiographic, historical, economic, and political criteria, this is how we divide it into the 4 subregions. England, it is so dominant in this subregion that the UK, that is sometimes referred to as the whole country, won't do that, is paid. England is anchored by the sprawling London metropolitan area, which in and of itself contains nearly 1/6 of the UK's total population. Along with New York, London is regarded as one of the top tier world cities with financial services, high technology, communication, engineering, and associated industries, reflecting the momentum of its long-term growth. Within England, there are noticeable differences between the crowded, fast-paced, and globally connected Southeast. That's kind of centered here on London, which is a little harder to see there. And it's differences between this area and the far less prosperous north and west this way. The latter areas were once, so around here used to be the big areas of the global, they were the global hearth of the Industrial Revolution. They've kind of now lost a lot of their dynamism, their industry and their dynamic appeal, and segments of their population in our age of pardon me, let me scratch that, restate this. So the north and west areas were once the global hearth of the Industrial Revolution, have now kind of completely lost their vitality, and segments of their population in our age of deindustrialization. So they're kind of deindustrialization and all of that is leading them to kind of lose their luster and shine and become less economically productive. More so, spatial inequality has been rising. And so today's widening gap between the rich and poor within England definitely does not have any signs of abating. So then we have Wales. So this area was once a refuge for the ancient Celtic peoples. And more than half of the inhabitants still speak Welsh. It also is, fun fact, home to the longest city with the name that. Hold on, and I will pull up a actual pronunciation of that. All right, so hopefully this will come through, but here's the pronunciation of the longest city name in the entire world. Yeah, I'm not repeating that one. But that always blows my mind. It's actually a compound word derived from the Welsh phrase for St. Mary's Church in a hollow of white hazel near the swirling whirlpool of the Church of the Saint Tilisio with the red cave. So, yeah, the Welsh are special. Because they had high quality coal reserves in the southern tier here. It was once also engulfed by the Industrial Revolution, and part of right down here, the Welsh capital was once the world's leading coal exporter. But the fortune of Wales has also declined, and many Welsh have immigrated, left. In several cultural and economic spheres, England or Wales is closely tied to England, so independence is not really in the cards. However, in Scotland, it's a little different. With a population of 5.5 million, Scotland's a major component of the UK, but maybe not for much longer. It's also well removed from Britain's, or from England's, sorry, thriving southeastern core area. Most of its population resides in the Scottish lowlands, anchored by Edinburgh, the capital, in the east, and Glasgow in the west. Attracted there originally years ago by the labor demands of the Industrial Revolution. Many coal and iron reserves lay nearby. The Scots developed a world-class shipbuilding industry. Subsequent decline and obsolescence was followed by high-tech development, most notably around Glasgow, and Scottish participation beginning in the 1970s and exploiting oil and gas reserves beneath the adjacent North Sea. Talking oil again. Nevertheless, a growing number of Scots feel that they are increasingly disadvantaged within the United Kingdom and that they should play a bigger role in the European Union. So in 2014, a referendum was held on the question of full independence. It did win the support of 45% of the electorate, but that's not the majority, so it didn't go through. Since then, however, the separatist cause has gained momentum, and it's only fueled further by the Brexit decision, which was strongly opposed here, and its new opening for independence, followed by Scotland rejoining the EU. So as recently as November 2023, there were still proposals of independence from the UK in order to rejoin the EU, but it is still a very, very complex issue, and it is far from being resolved. So Northern Ireland was home to not only Protestants from Great Britain, but it was also to a substantial population of Irish Catholics who then found themselves on the wrong side of the border when Ireland became independent nearly a century ago. Ever since then, conflict has intermittently engulfed Northern Ireland and spilled over into Britain. A declining share of the overall population of 1.8 million is Protestant and traces their ancestry to Scotland or England. Meanwhile, the proportion of Roman Catholics is rising. And in the capital, Belfast, Roman Catholics received majority status in 2014. Catholics share their religion with the Irish Republic on the southern side of the border. Although it might look like on some maps, I know in your textbook, one of the maps, it may look like there are big pockets, majority areas of Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. There's not really a clear separation. So mostly they kind of reside in clusters throughout the territory, including the walled off neighborhoods that still mark the major cities of Belfast and Londonderry. So the Republic of Ireland, it had a hard-won independence from Britain in 1921, but that didn't bring real economic prosperity until the final decades of the 20th century, when Ireland became known as the Celtic Tiger, which is likening it to the miraculous Hong Kong style economic development of the Asian tigers, which we'll discuss later on in chapter 10. I also like the name Celtic Tiger because I like tigers and have Celtic ancestry, so had to include it. They have participated in the EU since 1973. They adopted the euro in 2002. They have business-friendly tax policies, comparatively low wages, and an English-speaking workforce, and an advantageous relative location combined for a time to produce the highest economic growth rate in the EU. Ireland today, its population is around 4.9 million, continues its role as a major EU locus of high-tech technology and investment from the United States. All right, next region, Northern Europe. Northern Europe's remoteness, isolation, and challenging environments, particularly at latitudes higher than 60 degrees north. So I don't know if they have 60 clearly marked, but here, right there, is 65. So basically things north of that are very challenged just because of the climate. It's freezing, and all of that jazz. But it still has had a positive binding effects for much of this domain, and it seemed to kind of have fostered similar cultures. The Scandinavian peninsula that carries Norway and Sweden, actually, sense of their basic distance from mainland Europe, it was kind of removed from many of the wars that happened, and they developed in a relatively tranquil circumstances. Although Norway did get invaded by the Nazis in World War II, but we're just not going to talk about that. Well, I mean, I did, but that's about it. 3 of its major languages, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, are mutually intelligible, which means they're different languages, but you can still understand it. In terms of religion, there's an overwhelming adherence to the same Lutheran Church. Democratic and representative governments emerge early on, and individual rights and social welfare have been carefully protected for centuries. Women participate more fully in government and politics here more than any other parts of the world. So you go, girl. Hell yeah. But also, there's a lot of implications here. The southern, coastal, and more urbanized areas of this region form part of the European core, as you can see here. This is the remnants of what the European core is. But the sparsely populated remainder is not. In the aggregate, economic indicators for most of this region are quite strong, but all the development is concentrated within this smaller core zone. So territorially, northern Norway and northern Sweden, as well as most of Finland, belong to the European periphery, which we'll get into. The 5 countries of this higher latitude domain of Europe have a combined population of only 27 million, yet their core makes up prosperity and external linkages that they lack in size. Interestingly, some of these countries in the region have stopped short of full participation in the EU. Norway is not even a member, and Finland has only joined, and only Finland has joined the Eurozone to date. So Sweden is Northern Europe's largest country in terms of both population, 10 million, and territory. Most Swedes live south of latitude north, which passes through this area. So around here near Uppsala, I probably mispronounced that, but YOLO. So they all live south of this in what is climatically, like climate ways, the most moderate of the country. Here lies the primary city core area and main industrial districts. And here too are the main agricultural areas that benefit from lower relief, better soils, and somewhat milder climate. Sweden has long exported raw or semi-finished materials to industrial countries, but today the Swedes make finished products themselves, including motor vehicles, electronics, stainless steel, furniture. I don't know though, because they have IKEA, and that's build on your own type shit. Whatever. They also do glassware. Much of this production is based on local resources, including major iron reserves in Kiruna in the north, which I've lost. That's okay. And there's a steel mill up here in Luia. Sorry, I forgot to look up the pronunciation. I did so well on others. So Swedish manufacturing, in contrast to that of several Western European countries, is based in dozens of small and medium-sized towns, specializing in particular products. Energy-poor Sweden was a pioneer in the development of nuclear power, but a national debate focused on the risks involved has reversed that course. Sweden did join the EU in 1995, but chose to stay out of the Eurozone. Sweden has had a long tradition of neutrality in Europe. It is not a member of NATO, but it does defo have a wary eye, I should say, on Russia. And in recent years, it has intensified relations with the Western Alliance and has now been actively involved in joint military exercises, which makes sense because just past Estonia and Finland, there's Russia. So they're pretty fucking close to Russia. As Nordic Europe's biggest and most influential country, Sweden has historically dominated both Norway and Denmark down there. Culturally, Sweden has time and again made its presence known on the international scene, from popular music to films to literary works, and also the annual awarding of the Nobel Prizes. So Norway, unlike Sweden, does not need a nuclear power industry to supply its needs. It has found its economic opportunities in and beneath the sea. Norway's fishing industry, now augmented by highly efficient fish farms, has long been a cornerstone of this economy, and its merchant marine spans the world. So they ship out a lot of goods via ship. That was not my greatest explanation, but you meant what I knew. But over the past 4 decades, Norway's economic life has been transformed by the bounty of oil and natural gas found beneath the floor of its sector of the North Sea. Again, oil and natural gas. Yeah. So with its limited patches of cultivable good soil, high relief, extensive forests, and spectacular fjords. It's also just a fun word to say, fjord. Norway has nothing to compare to Sweden's agricultural or industrial development. In cities from the capital Oslo to the North Seaport of Bergen to the historic national focus of Trondheim and the Arctic Hammerfest lie on narrow coastal lowlands and have difficult overland connections. Isolated northern province of Finnmark, which I love the name of, has even become the scene of a de-evolutionary movement among the reindeer herding indigenous Smai. And I probably slaughtered that, but I'm sorry. The distribution of Norway's population of 4.5 million has kind of been described as like a necklace. This kind of goes wee, a really wee. Ah. Like here, it all kind of connects as like a necklace. But this has not constrained national development economically. Norway actually has one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. And in terms of income per capita, it's one of the world's richest countries. Interestingly, Norway uses almost none of the oil that it produces and exports nearly all of it. And the country's own energy consumption is virtually entirely from hydroelectric and renewable sources. So try to process that for a minute. Norwegians also have a strong national consciousness and spirit of independence. In 1995, when Sweden and Finland voted to join the European Union, the Norwegians again said no. They had little desire to exchange the economic independence for the regulation. They had little desire for their economic independence for the regulations of a broader and perhaps safer Europe. They did, however, join the Schengen area in 2010. Denmark. So there's something rotten in Denmark. And if you get that joke, I appreciate it. Territorially small by Scandinavian standards, Denmark has a population of 5.8 million. It's the North's second largest country after Sweden, and it consists of the Jutland Peninsula and several islands to the east at the gateway to the Baltic Sea. It is on one of these islands, this island right here that is called Klæland. It is where Copenhagen is, which is the capital of Norway. Copenhagen has long been a port that that collects, stores, and transships large quantities of goods, mostly because this is a break of bulk. It's a system of transporting cargo in separate pieces rather than one big container. This function exists because many ocean-going vessels cannot enter the shallow Baltic Sea. So this makes the city a transshipment center so that it kind of can help foster shipments out to wherever. Denmark remains a kingdom, and in centuries past, Danish influence extended far beyond its present confines. The remnants of that period continue to challenge Denmark's governance. For instance, Greenland became a Danish rule following a union with Norway in 1380, and it continued as a Danish colony until that union ended in 1814, which, goddamn, that's a while. But in 1953, Greenland's status changed from colony to a province. And in 1979, its 56 inhabitants were granted home rule under the new Inuit name of Kuladin Nonat. They promptly exercised their rights by withdrawing from the EU, of which they had become part of when Denmark joined in 1973. Greenland has depended on financial support from Denmark, but this has changed in recent years by following the discovery of, you guessed it, oil off of Greenland's west coast, north of the Arctic Circle. Through Denmark, Greenland forms part of NATO, which has a military base on Greenland's northwest coast, deep inside the Arctic. There's also the Faroe Islands that are located between Scotland and Iceland that have been have previously been a Danish dependency. They were awarded self-governance in 1948, and they have their own flag and currency, but Denmark kind of still reigns sovereign. So there's debates continue about full independence. All right, so Finland. First off, it is also the homeland of the winningest goalie in Boston Bruins history, Tuukka Rask. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. Finland is territorially about as large as Germany, but it only has 5.5 million residents, and most of them are concentrated in a southern triangle formed by the capital, Helsinki, then the textile producing complex of Tampere, and the shipbuilding center of Turku. In a land of evergreen forests and glacial lakes, Finland's national income has long been sustained by wood and wood product exports. However, the Finns have now developed a more diversified economy with staple agricultural crops and the manufacture of precision machinery and telecommunications equipment. Finland's environmental challenges and relative location have created cultural landscapes similar to those of northern Sweden and Norway. I combined that, my bad, of Sweden and Norway. Still, the Finns are not a Scandinavian people. Their linguistic and historical affinities are with Estonians across the Gulf of Finland. In fact, other ethnic groups speaking these Finno-Ugric languages are also widely dispersed across what is today Western Russia. Finland does share a long border with Russia, and during the Cold War, it had to tread very, very carefully in international affairs. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it joined the European Union in 1995 and was one of the first countries to adopt the euro in 2002. In the 21st century, Finland has decidedly positioned itself within Europe. It did not, however, join NATO, mostly because that would be a move considered too provocative towards Russia. Joining a group that is originally meant to be a military counterpart to the Soviet Union and then becoming one while you share almost your entire eastern border with would be bad. Yay. So Iceland. Iceland is an interesting area. It is a volcanic glacier-stubbed island in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, just south of the Arctic Circle. It is inhabited by people with Scandinavian ancestries. And as of 2019, its population was 340,000. Iceland is of special scientific interest because it lies astride the mid-Atlantic ridge. Here's where the Eurasian and the North American tectonic plates of the Earth are diverging, and new land can be seen forming, as well as spectacular volcanic eruptions are periodically displayed. This occurred memorably when the Eyjafjallajökull volcano brought transatlantic and domestic air traffic to standstill for days on end. Iceland's population is almost completely urban, and the capital, Reykjavik, right here, is home to fully half of the country's inhabitants. The nation's economic geography, is traditionally oriented to survive the frigid surrounding waters, whose seafood harvests have given Iceland a high standard of living. In the 90s, Iceland embarked on a economic liberalization policies, and its financial industries and banks grew rapidly. Iceland's landscapes formed the backdrops for movies like Lord of the Rings and for TV shows like Game of Thrones. And in the last decade or so has become an important tourist destination. I think that's also very much helped by the fact that for flights to Europe, there's a lot of times where you'll have a layover in Reykjavik. So might as well spend a day in Reykjavik and then catch a flight the next day type thing. All right, new region, Mediterranean Europe. Woo! So the northern sectors of two major countries of Southern Europe, Italy and Spain, form parts of the European core. Portugal, that's on the western flank of the Iberian Peninsula, remains outside of the core and is far less urbanized and more agrarian and not as strongly integrated with Western Europe. The remaining Mediterranean countries include Greece, the island states of Cyprus and Malta, Croatia, and Slovenia, of which only the last can be really considered to be part of the European core in recognition of its rapid economic development. Slovenia's recent upward trajectory is similar to that of the Czech Republic and others. So Spain. At the western end of southern Europe lies the broad Iberian Peninsula. It is separated from France and Western Europe by the rugged mountain wall of the Pyrenees, and from the North Africa by the Strait of Gibraltar, right here. Spain has a population of about 47 million, and it occupies this compact Mediterranean landmass. And of course, it does have Portugal in the southwestern corner. Spain has followed the leads of Germany and France and decentralized its administrative structure as concession to devolutionary pressures. These pressures were particularly strong in Catalonia, the Basque County, and Galicia. And in response, the Madrid government created a subnational framework of 17 so-called autonomous communities, or ACs. Even so, the new AC mosaic has not diffused any secessionist-minded movements. Relations between Madrid and the Basque Country remain tense, and in Catalonia, the drive towards independence is strengthening as the Spanish economy struggles while Catalonia continues to forge ahead. In late 2014, the Catalonian AC government held a referendum in which reportedly about 80% of the population voted in outright independence from Spain. However, the Spanish High Court swiftly voided this vote and said, no, this is against our constitution. No. So the Catalonian region is centered on the productive coastal city of Barcelona right up here. But it has also become one of Europe's four motors. It is endowed with its own distinctive language and culture that find vivid expression in Barcelona's vibrant urban landscape. In recent years, Catalonia, with its 6% of Spain's territory and 16% of the population, has annually produced at least a quarter of all of Spanish exports and more than one third of its industrial exports. And that is insane. Um, Spain's capital and its largest city, Madrid, lies near the lies near the geographic center of the state. It also lies astride an economic geographical transition zone. So, in terms of GDP per capita, the Spanish North up here is more affluent than the South, reflecting the country's inequitable distribution of resources, development opportunities, and environmental assets. Mostly the South suffers greatly from drought and inferior soils. The most prosperous ACs, apart from Madrid, are in the northeastern corner nearby the French border. Economically, Spain has been going through a difficult stretch. Economic decline has plagued most of the country since 2008, when it was hit hard by the recession and a housing market crash. By the mid 2010s, a modest recovery took hold. In early 2019, however, overall unemployment was still among the highest in Europe at 14%, and young unemployment hovered around 32%. So, oof. So Portugal, with a population of 10.2 million, occupies the southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. Because EU agricultural policies entail transfers from rich to poor areas in the EU, and because EU funds major infrastructural projects in more isolated areas, Portugal at first benefited substantially from its 1986 admission to the EU. In more recent years, most of these subsidies went to new members in the East, so it's kind of hurting in that way. Nevertheless, it still remains far behind Europe's leading economies. Unlike Spain, which has major population clusters on the interior plateau and its coastal lowlands, the Portuguese are mainly concentrated within their Atlantic coastal zone. The country has several excellent natural harbors, including those of its primate city, Lisbon and Sens, with considerable potential to to attract a larger share of container shipping, especially for transfer onto freight trains around for Spain. Still, these ports need to become more efficient and competitive. The best farmlands lie in the more western and northern zones of the country, like up here. But farms here are small and inefficient. And even though Portugal remains dominantly rural, it must import as much as half of its food because they just can't grow it. Portugal has seen growing tourism and residential real estate investment from more prosperous EU countries, which will help its economy, hopefully. Italy. Italy is fun. It is centrally located within Mediterranean Europe. It is the most populous of the realm's southern states and best connected to the European core. It is also also economically is most advanced, and it is economically the most advanced. Italy, with its population of 60 million, a charter member of the EU, the northern half of Italy stands strong in social, economic, and political. Stands strong in social, economic, and political realms, in contrast to such southern regions of Calabria, the toe of the Italian boot down here, Calabria. So this does not do as well financially, or economically, where this is much more financially sound. Fun fact, Italy also has a country within its own country. It has right here nearby the Italian capital of Rome. There is the Vatican City, which is its own separate territory. It just happens to be located right in the, well, not, yeah, kind of in the middle of Italy, but coastal, and makes sense for the Roman Catholic center to be near Rome. Italy also has two major Mediterranean islands of Sicily and Sardinia. Not surprisingly, Italy is often described as two countries. There's a progressive north and a stagnant south that is sometimes known as the Mezzogiorno. The urbanized, industrialized north is very much a part of the European core. The north and south are bound by the ancient and current capital, Rome, which lies within a narrow transition zone between Italy's contrasting halves. Whereas Rome remains Italy's governmental and cultural focus, the functional area of the country has shifted northward into Lombardy, at the basin of the Po River. Here lies Mediterranean Europe's leading industrial complex. It is the Milan, Turin, Genoa triangle, which I should have made the triangle for, but I did not. Katie, no cookie. So Metropolitan Milan itself personifies the new modern Italy, not only as its primary manufacturing center, which makes Lombardy one of Europe's four motors, but also as the headquarters of the country's financial and service industries. Although the Milan area only contains 9% of Italy's population, it now accounts for over a third of its national income, which, again, holy fuck. So yeah, there is Milan. And yeah. So other things, the Italian economy has been slow to recover from the global recession, and here too, austerity measures have been hard to sell. Beyond these challenges, Italy has been burdened by the flow of undocumented migrants who enter illegally from southern Italy, from the northern coast of Africa. Right here is Africa. So getting over to, getting over to Italy is a lot easier than trying to go straight to France or somewhere else. Between 2013 and 2015, these boat people that were desperately seeking political or economic refuge in Europe streamed by the thousands across the Mediterranean and in some of the flimsiest vessels towards Sicily. Many of these clandestine voyages ended tragically. It's estimated that several thousand drowned. The disintegration of Libya and consequently Syria has also caused an upsurge in migration flow and intensified this crisis. As noted earlier, the EU made a deal with Turkey to stem the flow of refugees coming from the Middle East, and a similar deal was brokered with Libya to turn the tide of migrants coming from Africa. So Slovenia and Croatia, these two countries that both lie in close proximity to Italy, were the most progressive to emerge from the 1990s disintegration of the former Yugoslavia. Slovenia is wedged against Austria and Italy in the hilly terrain near the Adriatic Sea, has just over 2 million inhabitants. It is a nearly homogeneous ethnic complexion and has a productive economy. Slovenia joined the European Union in 2004 and entered the Eurozone 3 years later. Croatia, which has a population of 4.1 million, became an EU member in 2013. It has a long coastline, you can see here, to the Adriatic Sea, and that has recently become a major European tourist destination. In the long and very bitter aftermath of the collapse of Yugoslavia, relations with its eastern neighbor Serbia are still strained. And the presence of a Croatian minority of about 600,000 in neighboring Bosnia continues to stir a range of political sensitivities, which we'll get into. Both Slovenia and Croatia joined NATO in 2009. So Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. Greece has long been called the birthplace of European civilization. It's a major historical presence in the Mediterranean region, and it is a longtime member of the EU and NATO. Geographically, it's also relatively far removed from the European core, seeming to kind of dangle from the southern end of East Europe. Greece was the wellspring of one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Its scientists and philosophers still cited to this day, and its famous tragedies still staged in amphitheaters built more than 2,000 years ago, which is true. Its familiar peninsulas and islands are bounded by Turkey to the east and by Bulgaria, Northern Macedonia, and Albania to the north. Note that some of Greece's islands in the Aegean Sea lie on the doorstep of Turkey. So Turkey's right there, and there are some islands that are awful close. In addition, Greeks represent the majority of the population in Cyprus in the more northeastern corner of the Mediterranean Sea. They have joined the EU, but EU membership has had other and far less favorable consequences. When the EU expanded to include poorer states such as Bulgaria and Romania, Greece lost a lot of its EU subsidy as Brussels had to divert its equalization funds to needier members. Then the global financial crisis hit Greece hard, especially in the late 2000s. It became increasingly difficult for the government to pay for what it had already set up, which they had programs that were guaranteed life employment in the public sector, generous early retirement packages, and to reward businesses with protection against competition and the loose enforcement of tax regulations. This did not lead for a good time. So suddenly, this proud and historic nation of 10.5 million found itself at the center of an unfolding economic and social calamity as the overmatched Greek government mired in mountainous debt and facing a massive street riots that greeted every effort at urgently needed reform, was forced to conform to a painful bailout terms imposed by the EU agencies, providing them with indispensable loans. By 2019, Greece was doing somewhat better, especially in Athens, but there is still an urban-rural divide that seems to be widening across Europe and elsewhere in the world. Cyprus has been an EU country since 2004. It is an island way up in the sea. It has a fractious political geography that does continue to cause problems for the Union. Cyprus lies closer to Turkey than it does to any part of Europe, and for more than 3 centuries, it was ruled by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. But today's population, like I said before, is predominantly Greek. And those are the people that have been there the longest. In 1983, 40% of Cyprus under Turkish control, with about 100,000 inhabitants, plus 30,000 Turkish soldiers, declared itself the independent Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Only Turkey recognizes this mini-state, which today has a population of about 330,000, whereas the international community recognizes the government on the Greek side as legitimate. Fun facts. So things got even more complicated when only the Greek side of the island was admitted to the EU in 2004. Oops. Resentment was high on both the Turkish side and in Turkey itself. A reminder of that Cyprus's green line separating its Turkish and Greek communities constitutes not just a regional barrier, but a boundary between neighboring geographic realms. The final component of Mediterranean Europe is the mini-state of Malta. It is a cluster of about 5 islands located just to the south of Sicily. Although I know I don't have all the islands here, but it at least had the main one of Malta. Although Malta contains about 450,000 inhabitants, its history is that of the crossroads at the very center of the Mediterranean Sea. This cultural nexus received infusions from Britain, it was a former dependency of, Italy, North Africa, and Southwest Asia. As an EU member since 2004, Malta enjoys a comparatively high standard of living, reinforced by a thriving tourist industry. You go, Malta. All right, last region-ish. So Europe has changed fundamentally in the 3 decades since the Cold War ended. And it does hurt me a little bit to admit that, yeah, that was 30 years ago. The old Eastern Europe, its western edges were sharply defined by the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union. That no longer exists. And to a certain extent, we have kind of seen the revival of an older cultural region known as Central Europe, or in its prevailing German terminology, Mitteleuropa, Middle Europe. Many of these changes occurred as NATO and the European Union expanded eastward. Several Eastern European states joined the EU, and the Czech Republic and Slovenia had already formed part of the European core. More are knocking on the EU door. Some are unlikely to be admitted because of their very poor economic circumstances, such as Albania and Moldova, whereas others, mostly Ukraine, would pose serious geopolitical challenges. Like, yeah, if we thought the Ukraine was like complex now, if they joined NATO, we ain't seen nothing yet. So the region defined as Eastern Europe covers roughly about half the realm's territory and encompasses no fewer than 17 countries. So we're going to kind of focus on framework of dividing it into 4 separate subregions, which are the Balkans, East Central Europe, the Baltic states, and the Eastern Periphery. So the Balkans are down here. I get confused very often because Balkans and Baltic are similar sounding, but very different areas. This subregion, the Balkans, the subregion of Eastern Europe, was deeply impacted by the violent dismantling of communist Yugoslavia during the final decade of the 20th century. I mean, there were definite US troop involvements over in Bosnia over a lot of this. It's not great. It was basically the latest chapter of a particularly volatile history, as the Balkans constitute what is called, or the Balkans constitute a classic example of a shatter belt. It is a zone that is, it's a zone of persistent political splintering and fracturing. Geographers use many terms to describe the breakup of an established order, and one of them they have come up with is balkanization. The recurrent division and fragmentation of a region. I would not be super stoked to be named after that, but you know, if the shoe fits. One of the key states on the current map, or sorry, I should remember that today none of the Balkan sub-region countries are considered members of the European core, and none of them are actually EU members. So the key state on the map is Serbia. The name of what is left of the much larger domain once ruled by the Serbs, who were dominant in the former Yugoslavia. It's centered around the historical capital of Belgrade, which is right up here. And it's also on the Danube River. Serbia has a population of about 8.8 million, is the largest and potentially the most important new country in the Baltic subregion. But Serbia faces some real tough challenges. First off, more than 1 million Serbs live in neighboring Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm pronouncing it. I know I pronounced it right earlier, but fuck it. Where they have uneasy relationships between, where they have an uneasy relationship with the local Muslim and Croatians. It's showed into Croats, kind of funny. Second, that shit that Serbia is dealing with. One of their provinces, Montenegro, broke away in 2006 when voters there decided to convert it into an independent state. Third, there's the Muslim majority southernmost province of Kosovo, declared their independence in 2008, and its sovereignty was immediately recognized by the US and a majority of, but not all, of European governments. And fourth, Serbia still incorporates a Hungarian minority of 250,000 in its northern province of Vojvodina. Clearly, the Balkans contain a virtual kaleidoscope of ethnic identities that severely complicates any kind of orderly territorial management arrangement. So when the former Yugoslavia collapsed, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bosnia, it's really kind of, most of the time it just gets shorthanded to Bosnia. It was the cauldron of calamity. No ethnic group was numerically dominant here, and this multicultural, effectively landlocked triangle of territory lying between the Serbian stronghold to the east, the Croatian Republic to the west and north, fell victim to a disastrous conflict among the Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, which is now the official names for Bosnia's Muslims, who comprise just over half of the population of 3.3 million. During this conflict, at least 250,000 civilians perished in concentration camps associated with ethnic cleansing practices. In 1995, the US brokered a truce, the Dayton Accords, that partitioned the country. You can see kind of the red lines here. This was all due to the US and the Dayton Accords. The southernmost republic of the former Yugoslavia it used to be Macedonia, but it has been renamed to North Macedonia in 2019. About 2/3 of the population of 2 million here are Macedonian Slavs. North Macedonia adjoins Muslim Albania and Kosovo, and its northwestern corner is home to the other third, who are also Muslims. The remainder of this culturally diverse population is Turks, Serbs, and Roma. Please note that your textbook includes an outdated name for Roma/Romani people, and it's actually considered a slur, so just don't use it. It's not good. I'm not comfortable saying it out loud just because of the connotation, but it's in your textbook. You can read it. You can ask me later if you want to know more about why it's considered a naughty word, but it is. Anyway, North Macedonia is one of Europe's poorest countries. It is landlocked and powerless. So why did they change the name? Well, one of Greece's northern provinces, Macedonia, is also named so, and it is prominent in ancient Greek history. For that reason, Greece objected from the start of naming the new country of Macedonia after Yugoslavia fell apart. These protests were pretty much in vain until Macedonia wanted to join the EU and NATO. Um, and then Greece, as an established member of both, blocked Macedonia's admission until it changed its name, which is just the pettiest and awkward thing to do. But you go, Greece, I guess, maybe. Um, Sorry about that. So the other dominantly Muslim country in Europe is Albania, which is down here. It's where 60% of the population of 2.9 million are adherents of Islam. Albania shares with another country, Moldova, the status of being Europe's poorest state. It has one of Europe's higher rates of natural population growth, and many Albanians try to emigrate to the EU by crossing the Adriatic Sea to Italy. Most Albanians subsist on livestock herding and farming, and they are also eager to join the EU. That is not likely in the foreseeable future because of financial economic shenaniganery. So let's all get East Central Europe. There are 3 states in this subregion. There's Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. They all adjoin or partially integrate into the European core. They are all EU and NATO members. And Slovakia has also joined the Eurozone. Considering that these countries were tightly bound into the Soviet bloc before its collapse in 1991, these changes are absolutely remarkable. The largest of these and most populous of these countries is Poland. It has 38 million people and is lying between 2 historical enemies of, so that's not a fun place for Poland to be, but it is what it is. Poland's borders have shifted repeatedly, again, because when you lie between 2 historical enemies, borders change. But its current post-1945 reconfiguration appears to be more durable than the previous territorial layouts. The historic and once central capital of Warsaw, which is right up here, now lies closer to Russia in the east than to Germany in the west. But the country today still is has decidedly shifted its days westward. After entering the EU in 2004, Poland saw hundreds and thousands of workers just depart and for jobs in the European core. But many have returned as the national economy grew robustly during the 2010s. Poland actually may now be in the best shape it's ever been in. And economic relationships with Germany are at their closest in history, which with their history is not saying much. But overall, Poland has greatly benefited, substantially benefited from joining the EU. The country's westernmost provinces, which border and are more closely tied to Germany, are much better off than those in the east. As I talked about earlier in Baltic geopolitics, Poland provides a very important corridor overland to the Baltic states, the Suwalki Gap, which plays an important part in NATO. Politically, Poland has been on the receiving end of criticism from established EU members about its authoritarian penchants and its defiance of common EU agreements, especially regarding the shared admissions of refugees. Then we have Hungary. Hungary's post-communist economic transition went surprisingly smoothly. By the mid-90s, most government-owned companies had been privatized, and Hungary was attracting significant foreign investment. It joined NATO in 1997 and the EU in 2004. But soon thereafter, its situation began to deteriorate as the Hungarian Empire, as the Hungarian economy was hit especially hard by the global recession of the late 2000s. Politically, heightening discord has centered on Hungary's persistent problems of irredentism, which really kind of refers to the government's open support for fellow ethnics residing in nearby countries. So ethnic Magyars or Hungarians are found in relatively large numbers in parts of neighboring Romania, Slovakia, and Serbia. So they're kind of getting into their politics by being like, hey, those are our dudes. But as for domestic politics, Hungary has recently taken a turn to the far right, unleashing both nationalistic and anti-Semitic tendencies that have been roundly criticized by European Union leaders. In 2019, some Western observers kind of questioned whether Hungary was going rogue. Slovakia, has a population of about 5.5 million people. It sits north of Hungary and shares a long border with Hungary. It also followed a trajectory similar to that of Hungary. It had a relatively smooth post-communist transition and rapid accession to the EU, followed by severe economic downturn and rising political controversies that have controversies that also drew rebukes from Brussels. In Slovakia, controversies around the revolved around the alleged poor treatment of ethnic Germans, Hungarians, Roma, were formerly known. That's the word I was talking about. Don't say it. It's a slur. Don't do it. And also for treatment of the LGBTQ plus populations. Yay. So we have then the Baltic states, which are different than the Balkans. There's the Baltic. So the Baltic states are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They're all positioned at the northeast extremity of Eastern Europe and can be grouped with the Northern European region or just with Finland around the Baltic Sea. The textbook considers the Baltic states a subregion of Eastern Europe due to their historical geography being so closely tied to Russia, in which they share a border and common recent history as Soviet republics. The geopolitical sensitivities regarding Russia are palpable here, yet the pro-European orientation is still crystal clear. All three of these countries have joined the EU and NATO, which is a bold thing for both, for all three countries, but especially Estonia and Latvia, being literally next to Russia. So Estonia, it's the northernmost states of the Baltics, northernmost of the three Baltic states, and it has a long-standing ethnic and linguistic ties to Finland. During the period of Soviet control from about 1940 to 1991, Estonia's demographic structure transformed dramatically. Today, about a quarter of its 3.1, scratch that and reverse it, 1.3 million inhabitants are Russians, most of whom came here as colonizers. We'll get deeper into that with the Russian Central Asian realm. After an initially difficult adjustment period, Estonia has forged ahead of its Baltic neighbors, Latvia and Lithuania. Busy traffic links the capital, Tallinn, to a nearby counterpart in Finland of Helsinki. And a free trade zone at the Muuga harbor facilitates commerce with Russia. But more important for this country's future was its entry into the European Union in 2004. Since then, Estonia has gained attention due to its economic advances, particularly its creative entrepreneurship in the high-tech and software industries. Skype, apparently, for instance, was originally an Estonian company, although Zoom kind of has killed Skype. It did enter the Eurozone in 2011, and as such, Estonia has developed an economy that has remained vigorous, and we classify it here as a stable component of the European core. You go, Estonia. So, the boundaries of the European core that traverses Europe's north does include southern Norway, Sweden, and Estonia, but it excludes the other two Baltic states. So Latvia, of the middle Baltic state, centered on its port and capital city of Riga, was once tightly integrated into the Soviet system through Moscow's long domination. Here, as in Estonia, about 1/4 of its population of 1.9 million is ethnic Russian. However, consider this. 25 years ago, virtually all of Latvia's trade was with the Soviet Union. Today, its principal trading partners are Germany, the United Kingdom, and Sweden. It did in 2014. It once again asserted its European it asserted its European reorientation by joining the Eurozone. Lithuania is the southernmost Baltic state with a population of about 2.8 million and a residual Russian minority of only about 9%. But relations with this gigantic neighbor are still very tense, despite a continuing dependence on Russia as a trading partner. One reason for this strained relationship is its neighboring Kaliningrad, which is a Russian exclave. Which means it's a bounded non-island piece of territory that is part of a particular state, but lies separated from the territory of another state. So Kaliningrad is technically Russian territory. Well, not technically, it's Russian territory, but it's not near Russia. When Kaliningrad became a Russian territory after World War II, Lithuania was only left with about 50 miles of Baltic coastline and a small port that was not even connected by rail to the capital of Vilnius. Significantly, Lithuania joined NATO in 2004, and a year later, it called for the demilitarization of Kaliningrad as a matter of national security. Russia did not oblige, nor will it in the future, as Russia gonna Russia. Of vital importance to Lithuania is the shared border with NATO member Poland, and following in the footsteps of Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania joined the Eurozone in 2015. So the European periphery. This region consists of about 5 of the remaining countries of Eastern Europe: Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. The first two joined NATO in 2004 and were admitted to the EU 3 years later. So that's Romania and Bulgaria. For the other three, such membership is not even on the horizon. Ukraine and Belarus found themselves on Russia's doorstep, and separate-minded Eastern Ukraine, with its substantial population of more than 8 million ethnic Russians, defended into a de facto state of civil war in 2014. So just how Romania persuaded EU leaders to endorse its 2007 accession still remains a mystery to many Western Europeans. Its economies are weak, its incomes are low, its governance has not been sufficiently upgraded from communist times, and political infighting and corruption are endemic. Sounds great. But this is a very strategically important country. It is located in the lower basin of the Danube River and occupies much of the heart of Eastern Europe. And like a number of other countries in this region, it was incorporated into NATO before it was allowed to join the EU. With 19 million inhabitants in a pivotal location on the Black Sea, Romania is a bridge between Central Europe and the realm's southeastern corner, where EU member Greece faces its historical adversary, Turkey, across both land and water. Across the Danube River lies Romania's southern neighbor, Bulgaria. The rugged Balkan mountains from Bulgaria's physiographic backbone separate the Danube and Maritsa basins. Bulgaria has 5 neighbors, and several of which are in political turmoil. In 2007, Bulgaria became an EU member once the required judicial and other social reforms were finalized. But today, its 6.9 million citizens constitute one of the union's poorest countries, and developments are not encouraging. A substantial amount of Bulgarians have used their newfound freedom of movement in the EU to seek out other opportunities in Europe's core. According to the UN, Bulgaria has the world's fastest shrinking population due to outmigration and declining birth rates. It does not help that most of those who move away were the young and the educated. We're almost there, guys, I promise. Territorially, the Ukraine is the realm's largest country. Demographically, however, its population of 44 million only qualifies Ukraine for like second tier ranking among European states. Like, it's cool. It's on par though with like Poland and Spain. And like Bulgaria, it's shrinking. Ukraine's relative location is absolutely critical. Not only does it link the core of Russia to the periphery of the European Union, but it also forms the northern shore of the Black Sea from Russia to Romania, in the center of which lies the strategically prominent Crimea Peninsula, which we will talk more about when we talk about the Russian realm, well, Russian and Central Asian realm. Perhaps more importantly, oil and gas pipelines connect Russian fields to European markets across Ukrainian territory. Once a land of farmers tilling its famously fertile soils, Ukraine emerged from the Soviet era with a huge and decaying heavy industrial complex in its east, as well with a substantial, about 18% Russian minority population. Most of Russians are concentrated in the zone that stretches eastward from the Dnieper Valley. I don't have this on the map, but it's there. The vital Dnieper River forms a geographical reference for comprehending Ukraine's division that creates a transition zone. To its west, it creates an to its west lies agrarian, rural, mostly Roman Catholic Ukraine. In the Dnieper's great southern bend and eastward lies the urban Russified, and Russian Orthodox Ukraine. For the most part, the Ukraine electorate is divided between a pro-Western and pro-EU North and West, and a pro-Russian South and East. Violent protests broke out in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, in February 2014 over major political disagreements considering relations with Russia and possible membership into the European Union. Pro-Russian groups inside Ukraine raised their profile by protesting against EU membership. The Crimea was swiftly annexed by Russia in March 2014 amid incredible objections from the Kiev government. Kiev, not Kiev is the Russian pronunciation. Kiev is more of the closer to the Ukrainian pronunciation. Hence my difficulty. Anyhow, the Crimea annexed by Russia amid objections from the government and most of the international community. Within days, the Russian border zone of eastern Ukraine was engulfed by escalating conflicts that pitted Ukrainian government forces against those of separatists, now directly aided by Russian military pressure. As of early 2020, much of eastern Ukraine is still controlled by Russian rebels, with both open and clandestine support from Moscow. Um, so still, many of the Russians and Ukrainians, about 6%, have migrated across the Dnieper River to an industrialized strip of land between that waterway and the Ukrainian border, proclaiming there a republic of Transnistria. This separatist movement constitutes only one of Moldova's. Sorry, I forgot to move the thing, so you can chill out here or pause here to take your notes. Beneficial recordings. So Moldova was Ukraine's minuscule, impoverished southern neighbor. It was at one point a Romanian province that was seized by the Soviets in 1940 and converted into a landlocked Soviet Socialist Republic. Half a century later, along with the USSR's 14 other republics, Moldova gained its independence when the Soviet Union disintegrated. Romanians remain the majority among its 4.1 million and shrinking population. So, as I was saying a little bit earlier, still some of the Russians and Ukrainians that have migrated across the Dnieper River to get closer to here. And this separatist movement constitutes only one of Moldova's multiple problems. Its economy is dominated by farming, which is in decline. An estimated 40% of the population works jobs outside its borders because unemployment rates in Moldova typically hover around 30%, which leads to smuggling and illegal arms trafficking becoming rife. These many misfortunes translate into weakness, and Russia's influence in the support of this Transnistria separatists keeps the country in turmoil. So Belarus is in many ways the most peripheral European country of all. It is landlocked, autocratic, isolated from Western Europe, in part by choice, and sustained in no small measure by the transmit of energy supplies from Russia to countries of the European core. Belarus itself has few functional ties with the rest of the realm and little prospect of progress. Nearly 85% of Belarus's 9.5 million inhabitants are Belarusians, meaning a white Russian, a Western Slavonic people. The economy of Belarus is almost that of a bygone era. No less than 4/5 of the workforce is employed by the state, which also allocates most housing. Except for a small contingent of oligarchs, private property does not exist, and neither do labor unions nor chamber of commerce. This is a society stuck in the old Soviet mode in a realm that continues to undergo profound change. In effect, Belarus trades energy subsidies for serving as a stable and willing buffer against further European encroachment on Russia's shrinking Western doorstep. So what are Europe's future prospects? The future of the European realm, involving both its internal dynamics and external relations, has become ever more tightly entwined with integration in the European Union, but also in this security structure of NATO. Today, the EU and NATO have penetrated deeply into Eastern Europe, encompassing a number of growing members, and have facilitated economic process and political stability as they've evolved over the past 6 decades. This amounts to a tremendous achievement. The EU now has a combined population of more than 500 million and constitutes one of the world's richest markets. But Europe is under significant stress. First, internally, the EU has to balance its policies and priorities among an ever more diverse and disparate number of member states. It must also demonstrate the value and legitimize integration costs to the European electorates. The problem of the so-called democratic deficit is a serious obstacle. From Germany to Greece, the citizens often feel they are not being heard, yet national governments must have their votes to support the union. The Brexit saga illustrates as much. Second, in recent years, Europe has been facing challenges of immigration and refugee flows. This aging realm really needs these migrants in the long term to remain demographically stable. But most countries have a culture that will need to adapt to the challenges of multiculturalism. And third, relations with Russia will be critical to the stability of this realm. They are far from cordial, and they are definitely unpredictable. The expansion of NATO onto Russia's doorstep has brought in a number of countries that badly needed security and stability. Still, it's only compounded by the difficult relations with its mighty neighbor to the east. So congratulations, you made it through. Thank you for listening, and I will see you soon, either with my recorded lecture or in class, where I will be going over the study guide for quiz 1, which will be next Monday. So, peace out.